Many of us might assume that voters are gender biased, but it's very hard to find good quality evidence for this, or indeed find out what we could do about it as well. Well, a paper presented at the 75th Economic Policy Panel used an ingenious natural experiment from France to teach us about the size of this effect and the possible causes of it. Hello, Jean-Benoit.
Hi, Tim.
Now, JB, it's not hard to see that women are underrepresented in politics. You just have to look at any parliament for that. But how much do we know about all the reasons why that might be the case?
Yeah, so unfortunately, women are underrepresented in politics. The literature has put several explanations forward to explain that. The first one is that for several reasons, women seem to be less likely to engage in politics. So one thing is that has been identified is the fact that at the time of motherhood, women prefer not to engage in competitive jobs, and also per se, it seems that women prefer not to go in the political areas and in non-cooperative areas. So it's the first reason. The second reason is that when they have entered politics, it seems that some political parties prevent them from being elected. So basically, they send them in non-winnable areas, and at the end of the day, they are not elected. And a last point that is something that is particularly important, and particularly important in the case of our work, is that voters can discriminate against women.
Yes. Now, this is what you've investigated in this paper. Gender-biased voting, I think, is what economists call it. And your investigation is based on an election took place in France in 2015. Tell me about this election.
Yeah, so this election was really specific and really fascinating. So for the first time of the French elections, voters had to vote not for a candidate, but for pairs of candidates that had to be gender balanced. So it was a way to reach parity at the end of the election. So the thing that was also really nice is the fact that for all these different binomes, on the day of the election, the order of appearance on the electoral ballots was determined by the alphabetical order. So one time out of two, you had the woman in first position, and one time out of two, you had the man in first position.
But if all the ballots have parties where there is one man and one woman to vote for, how can you use this to identify gender bias in voting?
The thing that we did was to consider all the different parties, to divide the samples in different parties, and to say, okay, so suppose that I'm right-wing parties winning with a woman in first position on the day of the election on the electoral ballot. Do I receive a higher or lower share of votes than if I had a woman in second position? And here, and that's really the precise point of the paper, the fact of having a woman in first position is the alphabetical order. So basically, it was completely random. And if you compare the binomes with women in first position and women in second position, they are exactly identical. The only thing is that because of the alphabetical order, on the day of the election, they had women in first position. So the thing that we do in our paper is just to say, okay, for the different parties, do I have a different share of votes that I received at the end of the election if I have a woman in first position?
So, in the end, what was the size of this effect? Was it the same for all parties?
And that's the thing that was really striking. The fact that comparing the pairs of candidates with a woman in first position and second position, we do not find any effect for extreme left, for left, or for extreme right parties. But for right-wing parties, we do find a substantial effect. So the day of the election, if you add on your binomes a woman that went first on the electoral ballot, you received between 1 to 2 percentage less vote on the day of the election. So in relative terms, it's high as it represents 4% of the share of vote that you should have received. So in other words, if you were right-wing binomes on that day and you add a woman in first position, there is 4% of votes that have disappeared just because you had a woman in first position.
Now, if I understand correctly, this whether the woman is in the first position on the ballot doesn't change anything, does it? Because both the candidates get elected. So is the reason why we saw this effect, is it because there was some kind of gender bias at work here? Did people just not understand this new voting system? What was going on?
Yeah, and so the thing that when we observe the results, it means two things at the same time. It means that there was a mistake, that voters misunderstood the rules of the election. Why? Because if the binôme is elected, the two candidates received exactly the same prerogatives. So there is absolutely no reason to discriminate. Okay, the fact of being in first position is just the alphabetical order. So we do, if we observe a result, we observe a mistake, a cognitive bias, but we also observe discrimination because the fact of having a woman in first position is completely random. So when we observe this effect, we know that for sure we observe a mistake and discrimination. But when we do not observe it, we don't know whether it's because we do not observe discrimination or because we do not observe the mistake. So in other words, for extreme left or extreme right, maybe they better understood the rule of the election, or maybe they didn't discriminate. We cannot conclude. But for right-wing voters, for sure, they both misunderstood the rules and they discriminated against women.
Because these right-wing voters did then change their votes based on either their discrimination or on this mistake, and just them, did this change the outcome of the election?
Yes, it did change the outcome of the election, as the right-wing binômes with a woman in first position had a lower probability of being elected after the second round of the election. So the effect was substantial both in terms of share of votes and also in terms of the output of the election.
And do we know what might then reduce this bias? Is there anything we can do to reduce this bias that you've observed?
Yeah, so I mean, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this precise point, and we have exploited an additional feature of the French electoral law that is interesting. The fact that on the day of the election, you can, but you do not have to report additional information on the ballot. So we collected as many ballots as we could, and we coded the information on the ballot just to see whether having an additional information when you are in the voting booth change your behavior. And it seems that for right-wing pairs of candidates, if you add a woman in first position, but if you added additional information, so the incumbency status, past political experience, or your occupation, in that case, the effect disappeared. So basically, it says that those voters, they didn't discriminate because of the gender per se, what we call in theory of discrimination, taste-based discrimination, but they discriminated for statistical reason because they didn't have a signal. They had a negative stereotypes, negative priors that led them to discriminate. But if you send a signal that is strong enough to these voters, they do not discriminate anymore.
Well, it is a fascinating piece of work and a huge insight into the effect of gender biases on democracy. JB, thank you very much for talking about it.
Thank you.
The paper's called Gender Biases, Evidence from a Natural Experiment in French Local Elections, and you can read about it as well as downloading the full paper on the Economic Policy website by following this link. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.